in relationship to Jesus Christ, you will pass through disease, you will pass through death, you will pass through all the futilities and disappointments and frustrations of this life straight into kingly, queenly glory.
How is it that in relationship to Jesus, we will pass through all the suffering and death of this present fallen world into eternal glory? That's the question John Piper answers in this episode of Light and Truth. The sermon was originally preached at Bethlehem Baptist Church on May 19th, 1996.
Now let's focus on verses 5 to 9. Verse 5 begins with the word for, or because, to show that what is now coming is a reason or a basis or a foundation for what was just said. Now what was just said? Verses 1 to 4, in a nutshell, say, our salvation in Jesus Christ, God's final word, is so great that it would be suicidal to neglect it. Don't neglect such a great salvation. Give earnest heed to this word, lest you drift away into destruction. And now comes verse 5. For it is not to angels that He subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. Now that took me many hours to figure out. What is that? Do not neglect your great salvation, for it is not to angels that He subjected the world to come. Get it? I don't get it. One of the things that is so good is not to get it at first. Because if you think you got it, you probably will never get it. I mean, that did not make sense to me for a long time. How does verse 5 support verses 1 to 4? Why is it introduced by that word for or because? Does it make sense? Don't neglect your great salvation, for God did not subject to angels the world to come. Now the issue here is who rules the world to come? Not angels, he says. Not angels. Who then rules the world to come? And how is that part of my great salvation that would cause me this morning to walk out of here and be more vigilant, more careful, more able not to neglect my great salvation, but to give heed to the final decisive word of Jesus Christ, my salvation? What is the answer? Now keep in mind this as we try to answer that question. When you look in verse 3 of chapter 2 at the phrase great salvation, that's a reference not only to the past where Christ made purification for sins, bore my curse, my guilt, delivered me from wrath and condemnation, clothed me with His righteousness. It's also a looking forward to what that purchased for me in the age to come, the world to come, as verse 5 calls it. How do I know that? Because in chapter 1, verse 14, the salvation is said to be yet to be inherited. Those who are to inherit salvation. You inherit what you don't yet have. So you've got some of your salvation this morning. You've got forgiveness of sins. You've got reconciliation with the Father. You've got the presence of the Holy Spirit as a down payment in your life. You've got a door of hope open to glory. But what you don't yet have is the redemption of your body, freedom from the curse of death, sinlessness, intimate, close fellowship with the Father face to face. We walk by faith and not by sight. So you've got precious salvation, and there's precious salvation you don't yet have. When it says we have a great salvation, it means don't neglect to look back. at what you have and don't neglect to look forward to what's coming in the world to come. For it is not to angels that He subdued or subjected the world to come. I still don't get it. How is my salvation undergirded and my devotion not to neglect it strengthened by saying that it's not angels who will rule the world to come? And the answer is given in verses 6 to 8. Not to angels, but to whom will He subject the world to come? Let's read it. This is the quotation from Psalm 8. But one has testified somewhere, saying, what is man that thou rememberest him? Or the son of man that thou art concerned about him? Thou hast made him for a little while, or a little lower than the angels. Thou hast crowned him with glory and honor, and hast appointed him over the works of thy hands. Now we know who it is, or do we? Who is this? Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. Don't neglect your great salvation, for it is not to angels that God will subject the world to come. It is man to whom He will subject the world to come. Now, Psalm 8 is pretty clear. And in its Old Testament context, it's referring to human beings in general, right? What is man that thou remember him? Or the son of man that you are concerned about him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. That's a celebration of two things: our comparative insignificance and our majestic destiny as those created in the image of God. Man is being celebrated to the glory of God because of being created in His image and ruling creation under God as God's deputy. That's what Psalm 8 is all about. Now the question here in this context is, does the writer of Hebrews believe that's what it means? Does the writer to the Hebrews give it that meaning? Is he saying, don't neglect your great salvation, for it is not to angels that He subjected the world to come, it is to you that He subjected the world to come? Is that the meaning of verses 5 through 8? I think it is. Which is why the breath is taken away that that's our destiny. Not to angels does He subject the world to come, but somewhere it says, what is man? He has crowned man with glory and honor. There's a massive problem with that. Big, massive problem with that. When we look at man, he is not subjecting anything, but is subjected by everything, especially death, which is very much on this writer's mind. At the end of verse 8, notice, at the end of verse 8 comes this sobering but. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to Him. That's an understatement. Man is to rule creation according to Psalm 8. And this writer says, I look out on mankind and I don't see it. Man's not a conqueror, he's a carcass. Everywhere. Tornadoes. How many were awake at 1:30 this morning? Raise your hand. He can get you up anytime he wants. You had control last night? I'm sure we had control last night. In Christ, you can enjoy that kind of thing, by the way. I was right downtown here and it didn't come. I just was envious of all you suburbanites because you got it, evidently, because I could hear it. It must have been 3-4 miles away and we didn't get any. Just wind. I mean, I want the lightning to crack and the thunder to crack at the same time. None of this delayed warning stuff. Flash, 1, 2, 3, boom! I said, come on in to Minneapolis. I love power. You were not in charge last night, believe me. No, nor were any meteorologists. We are subjected. That's what this writer saw. He looked around at disease, floods, tornadoes, wars, and he said, so where's the triumph for humankind? It is amazing what we can persuade ourselves of, we humans. Why, we can make airplanes. And we can make radios and televisions and computers and cellular phones and lasers and antibiotics and artificial heart valves and pacemakers and fertilizers and corneas to put in our eyes and satellite communications. We do rule. We rule creation. There's a big problem with that. And this writer knows. You don't have to live in the 20th century to know the vacuity of that observation. Namely, rocket scientists die. Death scoffs at our medicines. Death scoffs at our surgeries and our diets and our vitamins and our health regimens and our exercise programs. It takes babies. It takes teenagers. It takes young adults. It takes midlifers. It takes old people. It leaves carcasses everywhere. Doctors die. Politicians die. Professors die. Nobel Prize winners die. Rich die. The poor die. The good die. The bad die. Farmers die. Computer programmers die. Preachers die. Everybody dies. And because everybody dies, everything we thought we had triumphed over goes with us. We are not in charge. And therefore, you come to the end of verse 8, having quoted Psalm 8, man crowned with glory and honor. And he says, we do not yet see it. Now, how then is this a help for me to feel excited about my great salvation? Sounds like bad news to me. Psalm 8 held out a glorious destiny for mankind. Mankind is just one wasteland of disease and war and futility. So where's the good news? All right, verse 9. Be sure you see it in connection with verse 8. So let me read a little piece of verse 8 and then read verse 9, and you'll see how they connect. Verse 8 says, lamentingly, but now we do not yet see all things subjected to Him. Now I'm interpreting Him to mean human beings, according to what Psalm 8 taught us. Not Jesus yet. The transition to Jesus, the human being, comes now in verse 9. All right? Let's watch how it comes. But what do we see? We do see Him, capital H, who was made a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned, just like Psalm 8 said, with glory and honor, that by the grace of God He might taste death for everyone. In other words, this writer's way of thinking about the psalm seems to be this. The psalm is about humanity, destined to rule under God over creation as deputies in the image of God. And sin came into the world and devastated that purpose. And therefore, as you look around at the end of verse 8, we do not yet see things subjected to Him. You, me, Christians. But what do we see now? The last decisive final word has come into the world as man with a capital M. And He has taken all this disease and all this futility and all this war and all this sin upon Himself, and it crushed Him to death. And from inside the belly of death, He poisoned death, as Jonathan Edwards once said. And death vomited Him out into glory. And never will He ever be subjected again to disease or death or sin or futility, so that in Christ, Psalm 8 now stands finished. It is complete. There it is in the man. And you should ask now, okay, for Jesus, neat. I've got arthritis, or Parkinson's disease, or a blind kid, or a wife with cancer. Connect. The connection is made at the end of verse 9. He did this, suffering, dying, being crowned with glory and honor, that by the grace of God He might taste death for everyone. What that means is that He is our forerunner into glory. He has taken death upon Himself in a way that will enable you not to have to take it on the way He took it on. The stinger has been removed from it. The condemnation, the judgment, the wrath has been taken out of it. And it has been made a doorway to glory. Indeed, a crown of triumph. So, Christian, you who do not neglect your great salvation, you will one day reign with Jesus. Psalm 8 has been bought by Jesus for Himself and all who are in Him. In relationship to Jesus Christ, you will pass through disease, you will pass through death, you will pass through all the futilities and disappointments and frustrations of this life straight into kingly, queenly glory. Forever and ever. And not a word will fall to the ground from Psalm 8 for the new humanity that is in Jesus Christ. The first Adam sinned and forfeited this great promise of Psalm 8. And all that he got then was making bread in the sweat of his brow and going back to the dust. And now Jesus, the second Adam, comes into the world and He takes all that futility and all that sweat and all that condemnation and sin upon Himself, and He starts a new humanity as the new man and the new Adam. And He says, anyone can be a part of this humanity in me. We'll talk next week about who is the everyone at the end of verse 9. But let me close with this exhortation. You should be practically asking now, all right, if this is so, what then should I do? What should I do? And the answer is real simple. It's good old gospel truth. Put your faith in the promise of this great salvation. This morning, before you leave, put your faith in this glorious promise of a great salvation, that someday what has been now true of Jesus through death into glory will become true of you. Nothing can cut you off from it except unbelief. Put your faith in the promise of this great salvation and say to cancer, to blindness, to the paralysis of 20-year-olds, to airplane-eating Everglades, to children shooting fathers, say to them, Psalm 8 is our destiny. Psalm 8 is my destiny. To pass through all of those agonies and all of those frustrations and all of that sin and all of that disappointment into glory, where Psalm 8 says, with Jesus, the man, I will reign. And establish yourself in that. Believe that this morning, because if you believe that, then I know that as you move backwards in this text, you will not neglect your great salvation. It's just too great. It's too great to neglect.
This is Light and Truth, God-centered preaching to help you see Christ clearly and treasure Him truly. I'm your host, Dan Kruver. Thank you for listening. On our next episode, John Piper will preach a sermon titled, He Came to Save, the 9th sermon in our 12-part series, Listen to Jesus. I hope you'll join us. For more resources, visit desiringgod.org.